Last week I planted potatoes, and when I planted them I planned on making a video, but I thought that, well, the minute people see that I'm not planting potatoes in a box or a bucket or a bag or a stack of tires, they're not going to be the least bit interested, and they're just going to click over onto another video. And I've sat and watched a lot of videos of people trying to grow potatoes that way, and it really breaks my heart to see people work so hard for so little. So I decided to go ahead and show you how I grow potatoes, and maybe if you want to grow potatoes in buckets or bags or tires or whatever, you can apply what I know about potatoes to what you're trying to do, and maybe you'll get better results out of it, at least that way. But as for me, I would rather plant the potatoes in the ground. The first thing you need to understand is the life cycle of a potato. You'll plant a potato, the potato plant will grow from the ground, and it takes in all the nutrients surrounding it. And the potato will bloom, and then it will start dying off, and all of the excess nutrients that the plant didn't need will go down and be stored into the roots, and they become potatoes. So you need to keep that life cycle in mind when you're trying to grow potatoes. One thing some people will do is take a whole seed potato. Now that's the first thing you need to know is you need to plant a seed potato. The potatoes you buy in the grocery store aren't good for growing. I don't have a seed potato because I've planted all of mine, but here are some potatoes that sprouted in the house, and they were grocery store potatoes. Now, most grocery store potatoes have been treated with a growth inhibitor so that they won't sprout on you. And normally a potato has several eyes, and you can see each one of these potatoes only had one eye sprout. So that ought to tell you right there that something's going on with these potatoes to only cause one eye on each potato to sprout. And I have about 10 or 12 potatoes like this in the house, and every last one of them has one eye sprouted. The other thing they tell you not to plant are potatoes that you saved yourself. Now this is a potato that I grew last year, and I managed to carry it over from last June up until now, so it's 9 months old, and as you can see, 3 eyes have sprouted on this one. So they say not to keep your own potatoes and use them for seed, because the second year they say you're likely to end up with diseased potatoes. So I saved some because I don't know what I'm supposed to do if I can no longer buy seed potatoes. And so I planted some of these, and we'll see what happens. That ought to be interesting to find out. And here's another one that I saved, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 eyes on this one that have sprouted. So you can see for yourself that here's the ones I grew and have no inhibitor on them, and there's the grocery store ones. So that alone ought to be proof for you there that the grocery store potatoes aren't a good idea to plant. Seed potatoes aren't very expensive, and they're easily found at feed and seed store. Even Walmart sells them. And what you do, I've seen a lot of people plant an entire seed potato. You don't want to do that, because if I planted this entire potato, I would end up with 3 plants. I would have 3 plants growing in one small area, taking up the nutrients. It would take all those nutrients to grow 3 plants. Then after they bloomed and they started dying down and sending their excess nutrients to the soil, there wouldn't be enough nutrients there to make potatoes. It would have taken all those nutrients to keep 3 plants alive versus 1. I hope I'm making sense here. So when you plant your seed potatoes, you want to cut this potato up so that you would have 3 separate pieces of a potato. and then you want to set it aside and let it dry for 2 or 3 days. I've also seen people cut them and immediately plant them, and if you do that, chances are that that potato is going to rot. So you cut it into a section, set it aside, let it dry for 2 or 3 days and heal over good. Then you can plant them. Let me see if I can find some that I've planted. Here's a piece that I've planted. As you can see, I'd cut a section of a potato. There's the cut side. I set it aside and let it dry for about 3 days, and it gets a nice hard crust on it. And I plant it in the ground, and you can see there's the sprout, and it's putting out roots. And I till up the soil, and I make a furrow and set the potatoes in the furrow, and then just cover them over with about 3 inches of soil. And then after the plants emerge, I'll till alongside this row again, pull up a little more dirt, and so it's healed up. I know a lot of people worry about digging potatoes, and it is not a hard job at all. In fact, I have more trouble keeping my potatoes covered up than I do in digging them. And I have a few video footage, a little bit of video footage from my garden last year to give you an idea of how my potatoes grew. When I dug the potatoes, I ended up with a little over 11 pounds for every 1 pound of potatoes that I planted. And that's kind of an average return. Anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds to 1 pound that you plant is what you should expect from potatoes. Growing potatoes is managing the nutrients that it receives, because if you give it a lot of fertilizer initially, you'll get a lot of top growth. If you're familiar with fertilizer, it's comprised of NPK, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. With potatoes, you want to keep the nitrogen intake low to keep the top growth down and encourage the roots to grow. You want the potassium and the phosphorus counts to be higher. So what you really want is a fertilizer that's something like say 5-10-10 or so. I'm not sure how this. I always buy 10-10-10 for fertilizer and use that on everything. And what they recommend is a fertilizer that has a higher percentage of phosphorus and potassium and lower percentage of nitrogen. So if you see a bag of fertilizer and the first number is smaller than the second two, that's what you want for potatoes. And they recommend that you split your fertilizing of potatoes into 3 parts. You put a third of it on when you plant the potatoes, I'll give another third when they emerge from the ground, and then the last third goes on when they're blooming. And by doing it that way, you keep down, you're encouraging good root growth, but yet at the same time holding down on the top growth so that that top growth won't be using all of the nutrients to keep itself alive. Think of it like this. Think of it as, let's say you have one man that's 4 feet tall and another man that's 6 feet tall. You give them the same amount of food to eat. The 6 foot tall man might just live normally on the same amount of food that you give the 4 foot tall man. But the man that's 4 foot tall will probably get fat off the same amount, because all those excess calories are going to be stored as fat. And that's what you want these potatoes to do. You want to keep that potato down like the 4-foot tall man so that they store all their excess into the roots and become potatoes. You don't want your plants to be 6 feet tall is what I'm trying to say. And that same theory you can apply to what people are trying to do by planting the potatoes in stacks of tires. They're making that man 6 feet tall when he really needs to be 4 feet tall in order to get potatoes, and that's just why that isn't going to work. If you could take the principles of growing potatoes and apply it to that somehow, then it may work out for you. But honestly, I think the best bet is to stick to the old-fashioned way and plant the potatoes in the ground. Last year I decided that the easiest way to keep a record of how my garden was doing would be to just walk through it once a week with my video camera. Because of that, I have some shots of how my plants grew, but I didn't film it with the intentions of doing videos like this. So these pictures are of some of the potatoes at 1 week intervals, and you can see a few problems that cropped up on the leaves. If you see anything like that, it didn't affect the quality of the potatoes at all. The potatoes turned out perfectly. But you can pretty much see the growth cycle that I'm talking about. When you plant potatoes, you want to plant them about 1 foot apart so that that one plant won't have to compete with other plants for the nutrients. I don't know what caused the damage to the leaves. If anybody knows, leave a comment. In the last clip here, you'll see what I'm talking about, where I have trouble keeping the potatoes buried. We had a lot of rain right before that time, and it washed the dirt off my potatoes. You really want to keep the potatoes covered, because if they are exposed to the sunlight, they'll turn green, and you shouldn't eat the green part of the potatoes. They can be toxic. So that's how I grow potatoes. I'm sure I'm not technically correct. I'm just trying to keep things simple. But as you can see from this picture, once the plants start dying down, they have produced potatoes. I dug these potatoes right after this was filmed. I ended up with plenty of nice-sized potatoes, and they're very easy to dig. All you have to do is pull the plant up. Most of the potatoes come up right with the plant, and then you just dig around with your hand and find the rest. So, good luck with your potatoes. Hope it helps.